The last thing Ruth Macklin expected to inherit from her father was a ruined gas station on a dead mountain road. The last thing she expected to find inside it was proof that one quiet mechanic had secretly held an entire valley together for 40 years. By Christmas, people would drive for hours just to reach the station. But on the morning Ruth unlocked the door, she had no home, no money, and absolutely no idea her life was about to begin again. Ruth Macklin was 58 years old on the morning a judge dissolved her marriage with 4 signatures and 2 initials. She sat in a wooden chair while the words were read into a tin-sounding microphone, and she did not cry. She had already done her crying, weeks of it, alone in the guest bedroom of a house that had stopped feeling like hers long before the lawyers got involved. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and the particular kind of quiet that settles over places where lives are officially ended. Dennis wasn't there. He had sent his attorney, a man named Felton in a charcoal suit who kept glancing at his watch as though he had somewhere more important to be. Which, Ruth supposed, he probably did. She signed where Felton pointed. For signatures, 2 initials. Then Felton slid a single sheet across the table and explained, in the language lawyers use when they want plainness to sound like fairness, that Dennis retained the house, the savings, the retirement accounts, and the investment portfolio. Ruth retained a 2006 Ford pickup with a cracked dashboard and a sticky passenger door, her personal effects, and the real property at Route 11, Goshen County. The real property. That was what they called her dead father's gas station on a mountain road nobody drove anymore. Dennis's lawyers had appraised it at $14,000 and let her keep it without a fight. A rounding error, a footnote, a charity. Ruth picked up the cardboard box from under the table. Dennis had left it on the kitchen counter for her to collect. Inside, a jewelry box her mother had given her, a photo album from her daughter Connie's childhood, and a coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom" with a chip on the rim. 33 years of marriage, and this is what fit in a single box. She sat behind the wheel of the truck for a long time. $211 in a checking account that would soon have only her name on it. No apartment, no job, no plan. The friends she'd had over the years were really Dennis's friends, people who came to his dinners and laughed at his stories and would call him this week to check in, not her. She pulled the deed from the folder. The paper was old and creased, typed in the formal language of county clerks. Macklin Gas and Service, Route 11, Goshen County. Deeded to Ruth and Macklin per the last will and testament of Earl Robert Macklin, deceased. Her father had left her the station when he died 12 years ago. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 3 days sorting through his things, locked the door, and never went back. Dennis said the property wasn't worth the taxes. And Ruth, in the habit of agreeing with Dennis about money, about decisions, about most things, hadn't argued. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught on the 3rd try, coughing before settling into an uneven idle. She pulled out of the courthouse parking lot and pointed the truck south toward the mountains. Interstate gave way to Tulane Highway. Tulane Highway gave way to County Road. County Road became Route 11, a ribbon of cracked asphalt climbing into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory just beginning to blush at the edges, copper bleeding into green, the mountain announcing autumn without any urgency. Ruth cracked the window. The air was damp and cold and smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke, and, underneath all of it, something older, stone and soil and time. She had driven this road as a girl, sitting up straight so she could see over the dashboard of her mother's station wagon, counting mailboxes because that was before phones and she needed something to do. 2 months every summer with Earl, learning to pump gas and make change and check oil levels. He taught her to read a tire tread, to listen to an engine with her eyes closed, and pick out what was wrong. She could change a fan belt by the time she was 12. Dennis had found that charming once, early in their marriage. Later he found it embarrassing. He never told her to stop. He just stopped asking about it, and she stopped doing it, the way you stop doing anything when the person closest to you pretends it isn't there. She drove higher. The trees closed in. The road curved around a granite outcrop, and there it was. The station was smaller than she remembered. A single-story cinder block building with a flat roof and 2 pump islands out front, the pumps rusted and locked, their price displays frozen on numbers from a decade she barely recognized. Kudzu had swallowed the south wall and was reaching for the roof. The hand-painted sign above the door, Earl's own careful lettering, had faded to ghosts of words. One window wore a crack sealed with duct tape that had long since dried and curled at the edges. But the building was standing. The walls were solid. Ruth tried the door, found it locked, and dug through the cardboard box until she found the key ring from the manila folder. The second key fit. The lock resisted, then turned with a gritty click, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the air was thick and still. Late afternoon light filtered through dirty windows, laying pale rectangles across the concrete floor. A wooden counter ran along the back wall. Behind it, a pegboard with empty hooks. An old mechanical cash register with its drawer half open. And beside the register, exactly where he'd left them, Earl's reading glasses, wire-rimmed, one temple slightly bent. Next to them, a folded newspaper open to the crossword puzzle. 27 across was filled in with his careful block letters. 28 across was blank. Ruth picked up the glasses. The lenses were dusty but unbroken. She cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, a reflex from childhood, from handing them back to him 3 times an afternoon, and set them gently back on the counter. The station felt different in the dimness. Less abandoned, more patient, the way certain rooms feel when they have been waiting a long time for the right person to come back. Ruth ran her hand along the counter. Her fingers found grooves worn into the wood by decades of transaction, of elbows leaned and papers signed and change counted out. Then her fingers found something else, a seam in the wood paneling below the register. Not a crack, a seam, straight, deliberate, built. She knelt. The panel was about 2 feet square, flush with the wall, but not fastened. She worked her nails into the edge and pulled. It came away with a dry scrape, revealing a shallow cavity in the wall. Inside, a leather journal, thick and soft, held closed with a rubber band. A metal lockbox. A bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. Ruth's hands trembled as she lifted the journal out. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, darkened where fingers had gripped it thousands of times. She slid off the rubber band and opened it to the first page. Earl's handwriting. Small, neat, slanting slightly right. Dated September 14th, 1981. Lent Tom Hendricks $200 for the electric bill. Wife is ill and they can't afford to lose the heat. Told him to pay when he can. He won't be able to, but that's all right. She turned the page. Fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission. Charged her $30 for parts, nothing for labor. She's raising 3 children alone since Ray left. The oldest one helped me sweep the bay while Carol waited. Good kid. Quiet. Page after page. Names, amounts, reasons. Every loan, every free repair, every bag of groceries slipped into someone's truck when they weren't looking. Spanning decades. Hundreds of entries in Earl's careful hand, each one a record of a kindness he had never mentioned to anyone. Ruth sat on the floor behind the counter and read while the last light came through the dirty windows. Earl hadn't been keeping a ledger of debts. He had been keeping a ledger of needs. He noted when children were born, when a man lost his job, when a woman's roof was failing. He tracked the loans, some repaid in full, many quietly forgiven, and he never appeared to consider the difference a loss. She opened the lockbox. Inside, for $112 in small bills, a set of keys she didn't recognize, and the original deed to the property, passed down from Earl's father. The envelopes were harder to open. Her hands were shaking by now. She untied the twine. 8 letters, each addressed to Earl in different handwriting. Thank you notes, written on notebook paper and the backs of receipts. One from a woman named Linda whose family would have lost their farm. One from a man named Curtis who said Earl's $50 loan got him through the worst month of his life. Simple letters. Profound lives. Near the back of the journal, where the handwriting had grown shakier, Ruth found an entry dated 3 years before Earl died. She almost turned past it. Then she saw the name. Ruth called today, sounded tired. That husband of hers is spending again. New car, new suit, always something new. She says she's fine, but she's not fine. I can hear it in her voice, the way she talks around things instead of about them. She gets that from me, I suppose. I wish she'd come home. I wish she'd come home and let me teach her to change oil again, and drink coffee that's too strong, and sit on the porch watching the trucks go by. But she won't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just hope she knows the door is open. Ruth closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. The station was dark now. Through the window, she could see stars appearing above the ridgeline. More stars than she had seen in decades of suburban living. more than she had believed still existed above the world she'd been inhabiting. She sat on the floor of her father's gas station holding the record of a life lived in service to others, and understood for the first time what Earl Macklin had really been doing in this building for 40 years. He hadn't just been pumping gas. He had been holding an entire valley together with his bare hands, one small kindness at a time, and he had never said a word about it to anyone. The crossword on the counter was still unfinished, but somewhere between the last page of the journal and the first star above the ridge, a thought formed inside her that hadn't been there when she walked through the door. She wasn't going to sell this place. She woke to birdsong and the smell of dust. Pale light came through the apartment window and landed on the bare mattress where she'd slept in her clothes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the low, water-stained ceiling came into focus, and she remembered. She washed her face in the sink and brushed her teeth with a finger and some of Earl's expired toothpaste. In the small kitchen, she found a can of coffee still sealed with a plastic lid. It was stale but not ruined. The two-burner stove worked on the second try. She had no kettle, so she heated water in a dented saucepan and carried her coffee downstairs. The repair bay was in better shape than she'd expected. Earl had built it himself in the 70s, poured the concrete, hung the doors. 2 bays, one with a hydraulic lift that looked like it might still work. His tools hung on a pegboard covering the entire back wall, each one organized by size and type, each one outlined in black marker so you could see at a glance if something was missing. Everything was dusty but whole. Earl had cared for his tools the way other men cared for their cars. Ruth ran her hand along the workbench. Her fingers found the groove she'd carved into it when she was 9, dragging a flathead screwdriver while Earl wasn't watching. He'd found it the next day and shaken his head. "Now the bench has character," he'd said. She stood there holding the memory until it settled into something she could carry. She was outside when she heard tires on gravel. An old Chevy truck pulled up to the station. A heavy-set man climbed out, slow and deliberate, wearing a plaid flannel shirt and a feed store cap. He stood in front of the building with his hands on his hips, studying the cracked windows and the kudzu-covered wall. "Morning," Ruth called. The man turned. His face was deeply lined and sun-darkened, with white stubble along his jaw. He squinted for a long moment, then took off his cap. "I'll be damned," he said. "You're Earl's girl." "Hank Dawson. I live 2 miles down the mountain. Your daddy and I played cards every Thursday for I don't know how long." "I remember," Ruth said. "You used to bring corn from your garden." Hank grinned. "Still do, though there's nobody to bring it to anymore." He looked at the station, then back at her. "What brings you up here?" Ruth considered how to answer. She could have deflected. Instead, she told the truth. "My husband divorced me. He got the house and everything in it. This is all I have left." Hank nodded slowly. He didn't offer sympathy or ask questions. He walked to his truck and came back with a thermos and 2 ceramic mugs. "Well then," he said, pouring. "You'll need better coffee than whatever ancient can you found in Earl's cabinet." They sat on overturned buckets on the cracked concrete apron in front of the station, and Ruth let the silence between sentences be what it was, not awkward, but earned. "Tell me about him," Ruth said. "Tell me the things he didn't tell me." Hank sipped his coffee and looked out at the mountains. "Your daddy was a complicated man in a simple way. Worked hard, kept his head down, didn't talk much about himself. But he had this thing about people. Couldn't stand to see someone struggle if he could do something about it. I found his journal," Ruth said. "He wrote everything down. Every family he helped, every loan, every free repair." Hank shook his head slowly. "That stubborn fool. Never told a soul what he was doing. I only knew because I caught him once, loading groceries into the Sutter family's truck at midnight. He told me he was reorganizing inventory." Hank smiled. "Reorganizing it right into their back seat." Ruth laughed. It surprised her, sudden and unguarded, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere below the chest. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. "Folks around here still talk about him," Hank said. "Not in big ways. Just quiet mentions. Someone will say the lights stayed on because of Earl, or that their car ran another winter because Earl fixed it for nothing. And then the conversation moves on, because that was how Earl wanted it. Why didn't he tell me any of this?" Hank looked at her steadily. "Because Earl didn't think it was anything special. He thought it was just what you did when you live somewhere and you have 2 hands and a set of wrenches. He didn't think it needed a name or a medal or a conversation. He just did it." They sat in silence. A truck passed on Route 11, the first vehicle Ruth had seen since arriving. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. The mountain greeting. She had forgotten about it. Earl Macklin died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by everyone. Hank said quietly. That was the richest a man could be. Hank left mid-morning with a promise to return with lumber. Ruth spent the rest of the day cleaning. She swept the main room, washed the windows with newspaper and vinegar, scrubbed the counter until the wood grain showed through decades of grime. At noon, a woman Ruth didn't recognize pulled up in a minivan and left a casserole on the front step with a note. Welcome home, Earl's daughter. Ruth didn't know how word had traveled so fast. Mountain News needed no wires. By afternoon, 3 more people had stopped. An elderly man who left a stack of firewood against the side of the building. A couple who brought cleaning supplies in a plastic bin and set them by the door without a word. A teenage girl who dropped off a bag of groceries, waved shyly, and drove away before Ruth could say thank you. Each one delivered the same message in different words, with identical meaning. Earl helped us once. We're glad you're here. Ruth carried the groceries upstairs and put them away. Bread, eggs, milk, canned soup, a bag of apples, and stood at the window looking down at the rusted pump islands and thought about what kind of man her father had been and what kind of woman she intended to become. She spent the afternoon in the bay testing the hydraulic lift and checking the air compressor, organizing tools she hadn't touched in 3 decades. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget: the weight of a socket wrench, the resistance of a rusted bolt, the satisfaction of hearing a stuck mechanism finally surrender. Late in the afternoon, with the sun dropping behind the western ridge, she heard an engine struggling on the road. A white pickup truck limped toward the station, steam rising from under the hood, and rolled to a stop 20 yards past the building. A young man climbed out, maybe 23, lean and sunburned, wearing a gray t-shirt with grease already on it. His jeans were torn at the knee. He popped the hood and looked at the engine with the focused expression of someone who understood what they were looking at, but didn't have what they needed to fix it. Ruth walked over. Radiator. He looked up, surprised. Hose blew. Upper one. I've got a spare in the bed, but no tools. I've got tools. She nodded toward the bay. Pull it in if it'll make it. He looked at her, then at the station. She could see the hesitation in his face, the particular hesitation of someone who has learned not to accept help because it always arrives with conditions. I can pay for the bay time, he said. I didn't ask for money. I said pull it in. His name was Jesse Rowan. He had the old hose off in 6 minutes. Ruth found a replacement in Earl's stockroom that was close enough to work with a couple of extra clamps, and she watched Jesse install it, his hands moving with the quick, precise confidence of someone who had been doing this since childhood. Where'd you learn? She asked. My grandmother's boyfriend had a shop in Boone. I spent every summer there until I was 16. He tightened the last clamp. Haven't worked in a shop since. Last 3 places I tried didn't work out. Ruth didn't ask why. She could see enough in his face to fill in the story. Young, no family support, probably sleeping in that truck. I'm reopening this station, she said. The words came out before she'd fully decided they were true. I need someone who can turn a wrench. Jesse looked at her steadily. You don't know me. I know you replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today. He poured coolant into the radiator and started the engine and listened to it run. Then he closed the hood. I'll think about it, he said. Come back tomorrow if you decide. I'll have coffee on. Jesse drove off down Route 11. Ruth watched his taillights disappear around the curve, then went inside and read the rest of Earl's letters by lamplight, and near the bottom of the bundle found an envelope that had never been opened. Her name was written on the front in Earl's careful block letters. Just Ruth. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out 2 sheets of yellow legal paper. Dear Ruth, if you're reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would. She leaned against the counter and held the paper close to the light. I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth much on paper. A building inspector would condemn half of it, and a real estate agent would call it a teardown. But it's worth everything to the people who depend on it. I don't mean the gas or the repairs, though those matter. I mean the fact that it's here, that someone is behind the counter, that the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. I know about Dennis. I've known for a long time. You think you hit it well, but a father sees what a father sees. He's not a bad man, Ruth. He's just a man who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as value. Someday you'll see the difference. I hope it doesn't cost you too much to learn it. This station is yours, not because it's worth money, but because you're the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. And if you can, keep the coffee on. That matters more than you think. Love, Earl. Ruth folded the letter carefully and set it on the counter beside his glasses and the unfinished crossword. 3 objects from a man gone more than a decade. And yet the station felt more full of him now than it had when she first walked through the door. Outside, the mountains turned from blue to black, and the stars came out in their thousands. She climbed the stairs and lay down. For the first time in longer than she could measure, she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Jesse's truck pulled into the lot at 7 the next morning. Ruth was already downstairs sweeping the front apron. She set the broom against the wall and waited while he climbed out and stood for a moment just looking at the building. He walked over. She handed him a mug. He took it and drank without asking what was in it. "I'll work a week," he said. "See how it goes." Fair enough. That was how it started. A mug of coffee and a week to see how it went. Ruth had made a list on the back of one of Earl's old receipts. Broken windows, porch railing, gutters, kudzu, water damage in the south wall, the pump islands. The list filled the receipt and spilled onto the counter. Jesse studied it. "You planning to rebuild the whole place?" "Just the parts that are falling down." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to one she'd seen from him. They divided the work without discussion. Jesse took the repair bay, testing the compressor, bleeding the hydraulic lift, sorting parts in the stockroom. Ruth tackled the main building. She pulled kudzu off the south wall by hand, filling a wheelbarrow with vines until the pile was taller than she was. The plant had worked its roots deep into the mortar, and pulling it free was slow, stubborn work that left her hands raw by noon. Hank arrived at 9 with a truck bed full of lumber. He finished the new porch railing by 11:30. Pine, pale and clean against the weathered floor. Earl would have used cedar. "Pine'll do," Hank said, and drove off. Jesse replaced the cracked front window, caulked the frames on the others, and got the furnace running after 2 afternoons of clearing bird nests and replacing a corroded ignition switch. "That furnace should have been condemned a long time ago," he told Ruth. "But it's stubborn. Runs in the family," she said. Ruth painted the door and window trim dark green, the same shade Earl had always used, from a can she found in the stockroom. Hank rehung the hand-painted sign above the front door, straightening it against the wall with a level he produced from somewhere in his truck without being asked. The work had a rhythm. Sunrise to last light. Dust and grease and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Hank showed up most mornings with materials and disappeared most evenings without fanfare. Ruth tried once to pay him. He looked at her like she'd said something offensive. "Earl helped me re-shingle my roof back in '98, he said. "Took him 3 days. Wouldn't take a dime. Said I could buy him a steak when I won the lottery. He drove a nail into a step he was replacing. Never won the lottery. So this is the steak." Jesse kept the tools clean and returned each one to its outlined spot on the pegboard. When he didn't know how to fix something, he said so plainly. When he did know, he worked with a quiet confidence that reminded Ruth, in small, specific ways that she felt more than analyzed, of watching Earl. The pumps were the biggest problem. The underground tanks needed inspection, and the pumps themselves were relics. Ruth called every fuel company within 50 miles. Most hung up when she described the location. The 4th company she called was run by a man named Grady. "Earl Macklin's daughter," he said, and went quiet for a moment. "Your daddy kept my trucks running when I was just starting out. He wouldn't charge full price because he said a man trying to build something shouldn't be punished for trying. Grady sent a crew the following week. They inspected the tanks, flushed the lines, and installed 2 new pump heads. Ruth signed a fuel contract with terms she could barely manage if enough cars stopped. It was a gamble. Everything about this was a gamble. The first customer came on a Thursday. An older woman in a white sedan rolled down her window and stared. "Are you open?" "We are." The woman climbed out slowly, holding the car door for balance, and looked at the station like someone seeing a photograph of a place they'd almost forgotten they loved. "I used to come here every week when Earl was alive," she said. "He always checked my tires. He never charged me." Her eyes filled. "I didn't expect anyone to be here." Ruth filled her tank and checked her tires. When the woman reached for her wallet to pay for the inspection, Ruth waved her off. "Your daddy did the same thing," the woman said softly. "Exact same wave." After that, the customers came steadily. Not many, but enough. People who lived in the valley and remembered the station when it was Earl's. They came for gas and stayed for the porch. Ruth bought a proper coffee maker with the last of the lockbox money and set it on a table just inside the front door, in the same spot Earl had always kept his. A man drove 45 minutes each way to get his oil changed here instead of at the shop 10 minutes from his house. A woman brought her teenage son because she wanted him to know what Earl had done for their family. An elderly couple who hadn't made the drive up the mountain in months came just to sit on the porch and tell Ruth about the time Earl fixed their truck on Christmas Eve and refused to charge them because, he said, it was technically a holiday and he didn't work holidays, so there was nothing to bill. Jesse settled into the bay with a focus Ruth hadn't anticipated. He arrived before she came downstairs every morning. He kept the tools clean. He never cut corners and never quoted more than the work was worth. Word spread through the valley that the mechanic at Macklin's was fast, honest, and fair, and people drove past newer shops because they trusted a place with Earl's name on it. Jesse understood this without being told, and he acted accordingly. Ruth paid him from the fuel sales and repair fees. It wasn't much. He didn't complain. She noticed he was stretching his back beside the lift one afternoon and made the offer without preamble. "You need the mattress in the spare room upstairs." He looked at her. "I'm fine in the truck." "Nobody's fine sleeping in a truck, Jesse. Take the room." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded and went back to work. Ruth found a mattress at a yard sale that weekend for $15. Jesse carried it upstairs without a word. But Ruth noticed that after that, the tools were arranged on the pegboard with an even greater care, each one replaced precisely in its outline at the end of every day, as though he understood now that he was living inside something that deserved to be treated gently. She ran the station the way she believed Earl would have. When a man came in with a screaming fan belt and his wallet already out, she charged him for the belt and nothing for labor. When a young mother pulled up with her tank near empty and a look on her face that had nothing to do with the car, Ruth filled it and told her to pay next time. When an elderly couple asked about brake pads and Ruth could see the arithmetic behind their eyes, she quoted them half the price and covered the rest herself. She wasn't trying to be generous. She was trying to be useful. There was a difference, and Earl had understood it better than anyone she had ever known. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after she reopened the station. White, heavy stock, with a return address she recognized immediately. Felton and Associates. She opened it at the counter, standing beside Earl's reading glasses and the half-finished crossword. The language was dense, but the meaning was plain. Dennis was filing a motion to include the gas station in the marital asset division. His lawyers claimed Ruth had failed to disclose the property's true value during settlement. They cited a planned state highway expansion that would significantly raise the land's assessment. They wanted the court to reopen the settlement and either award Dennis his share or force a sale. Ruth set the letter down. Her hands were steady. Her stomach was not. She read it a third time, looking for a gap in the argument, something thin enough to press against. She didn't find one. She thought about calling a lawyer. She didn't know any lawyers, and the ones she could find would cost money she didn't have. The fuel sales barely covered the contract and Jesse's wages. The lockbox was empty. That night Connie called. "Mom, I heard about the letter." "How?" "Dad told me." A pause. "He says the property is worth more than what was declared. That there's a highway coming through." "There's always a highway coming through somewhere, Connie." "Mom, listen to me. If it's worth something, why not sell? Take the money, get an apartment, start over properly." "I'm not selling." "Why not?" "Because this isn't about money." Connie went quiet. Ruth could hear her breathing, slow, measured, the kind that means you're holding something back. "I sided with Dad during the divorce," Connie said. "You know that." "I know. It was easier. He had the answers. He always had the answers, and you just agreed with everything. I didn't respect that, Mom. I need you to know that." The words landed. Ruth felt them settle. "You were right not to," Ruth said. Silence. "I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier. That's not something to respect. But I'm done agreeing." She poured herself more coffee and let the quiet do the rest. Some things needed space more than they needed a response. When Connie finally said good night, something between them had shifted. barely perceptible, like the first degree of change in a tide. Ruth hung up and sat in the dark station. The mountains were black against a sky thick with stars. She got up and made a fresh pot of coffee because that was what you did. You made coffee and kept the light on and waited for morning. 3 days later, Ruth heard a sound she recognized before she saw the car. Deep, smooth, expensive. A silver SUV pulled into the lot, polished and new. Dennis climbed out, 61 and looking younger, tanned and trim in a navy polo and pressed khakis. He put on sunglasses and assessed the station the way he assessed properties, measuring the bones before he decided whether to be interested. "Ruth," he said. "Dennis." He walked toward her with his hands in his pockets, taking his time. "Nice little project," he said. "Your father's place. I think I came out here once, when we were dating. You didn't come to talk about my father." He took off his sunglasses and studied her. She recognized the expression, the look he wore when he was calculating the fastest path to what he wanted. "I came because I thought we could talk before the lawyers make this ugly," he said. "The property is undervalued, Ruth. That highway expansion will push the land value to 10 times what it appraised for. You know it, and I want my fair share." "Fair," Ruth said. The word hung in the mountain air between them. Dennis used it the way other men used a handshake. It sounded reasonable until you looked at the terms. "You got the house," Ruth said. "The savings. The retirement accounts. Everything except a gas station your own lawyers called a teardown. And now you want that too. I want what the court should have considered. This property was my father's. He left it to me in his will. It was never part of our marriage." Dennis stared at her. She could see the rehearsed conversation falling apart behind his eyes, the script going sideways. He had expected her to fold. He had driven 4 hours expecting the Ruth he remembered, the one who signed where Felton pointed and agreed because agreeing was easier than fighting. That Ruth was gone. "I'll see you in court," Dennis said. He put his sunglasses back on and walked to the SUV. The gravel popped under his tires. Ruth watched until the silver disappeared around the curve, then went inside. Ruth was behind the counter the next morning when Hank walked in. He looked at the letter from Felton sitting on the counter, then at her. "Dennis was here yesterday," she said. "I know. Mountain News." Hank poured himself coffee and settled onto the stool. "What's he want?" "His share of the station. His lawyers say it's undervalued because of some highway expansion." Hank set his mug down. "They've been talking about that highway for as long as I can remember. It never happens." He paused. "But that won't stop a lawyer from billing hours over it. I can barely afford the coffee, Hank." He was quiet for a moment, turning the mug in his hands. "Then, there's a woman in Barton. Retired attorney. Quit practicing 5 or 6 years back, moved up from Richmond. Her daughter was sick when she was little. Needed heart surgery the insurance wouldn't cover. Ruth waited. Earl paid for it," Hank said. $3,200. He took it right out of the station's earnings. Never told her where it came from. But she found out, eventually. People around here always find out. You think she'd help? I think if you tell her you're Earl Macklin's daughter and your ex-husband is trying to take what Earl left you, she'll be here by tomorrow." Hank called her that afternoon. The attorney arrived the next morning in a gray sedan, carrying a leather briefcase that had clearly seen every courtroom in Virginia. She was in her late 60s, tall, straight-backed, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. "You're Earl's daughter," she said on the porch. It wasn't a question. They sat at the counter with the Felton letter between them. The attorney read it slowly, turning pages with a calm earned from thousands of documents just like it. When she finished, she set her glasses beside Earl's on the counter. "This is a nuisance claim," she said. "His lawyers know it. He probably knows it. But nuisance claims work because most people can't afford to fight them. Pressure until you fold. That's the strategy. Can he win? Not if the property was never marital. Was the station ever in both your names? No, it was Earl's. He left it to me when he died. Did you and your husband ever use the property? Make improvements? Pay taxes on it jointly? Dennis never set foot in this station until 3 days ago. I haven't paid the taxes on it in years. The county sent notices, but the amounts were small, and I wasn't paying attention. That's actually helpful. If neither of you maintained, improved, or used the property during the marriage, it stays separate." She paused. "Let's find the original deed." Ruth led her to the repair bay, to the green filing cabinet. They went through it drawer by drawer. In the bottom drawer, in a manila envelope labeled Simply Property, Ruth found the deed from Earl's father, dated 1971, transferring the land and building to Earl Robert Macklin. Below it, a copy of Earl's will, witnessed and notarized, leaving the property solely to Ruth and Macklin. The attorney held both documents up to the light from the bay door. "This is clean," she said. "It passed from your grandfather to your father, from your father to you. Never jointly held, never commingled with marital assets." She set the papers on the workbench. "His motion will be dismissed." Ruth leaned against the workbench. The relief came slowly, loosening something in her shoulders that had been clenched since the envelope arrived. "What do I owe you?" she asked. The attorney looked at her steadily. "Your father paid for my daughter's surgery when I couldn't. He never asked for anything. He never even told me it was him." She picked up her briefcase. "There's nothing you owe me, Ruth. This one was paid for a long time ago." That afternoon, Jesse was reorganizing the filing cabinet when Ruth heard the sound of his work stop. She was wiping down the front windows and almost didn't notice, but the silence had a weight to it that was different from his usual concentration. She walked to the bay door. Jesse was sitting on a milk crate, a folder open on his lap, staring at a single sheet of paper with the focused stillness of someone who has just had something rearranged inside them. "Jesse." He didn't look up. Ruth walked over and stood beside him. The folder was labeled Rowan in Earl's careful handwriting. Inside, one page. "Clara Rowan, surgery refund, $3,200. Heart valve replacement, August 1994. Sent through the doctor's office as anonymous donation. Don't let her know where it came from." Jesse's hands were shaking. He closed the folder and pressed it flat against his knees. "My grandmother," he said. His voice was tight and even, the voice of someone holding himself together by concentrated will. "She had heart surgery when I was a baby. She always said someone anonymous paid for it. She looked for that person for the rest of her life." Ruth sat on the concrete floor beside the milk crate. She didn't say anything. Some moments needed silence more than words. "She told me that story every time I visited," Jesse said. "Said whoever paid for that surgery was the reason our whole family existed." He looked up. "Earl never met me. He never knew I'd exist. But the reason I'm alive, the reason my grandmother survived, the reason any of us are here, is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's surgery." "That's who he was," Ruth said. Jesse nodded. He stood up, returned the folder to the cabinet, and went back to work without another word. But he stayed later than usual that night. And when he cleaned Earl's tools before locking up, he handled each one the way you handle something that belongs to someone you wish you'd known. Connie arrived on a Saturday unannounced. Ruth was on the porch with two regulars when the rental car pulled into the lot. Connie sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. She was wearing a white blouse and tailored pants that belonged in a design office, not a gravel lot on a mountain road. "Mom." She walked over with the careful steps of someone entering a place they've already decided is a mistake. "Connie." Ruth stood. "You didn't call. I wanted to see for myself." Ruth brought her inside. Connie stopped just past the door, and Ruth watched her daughter take the room in. The clean windows, the stocked shelves, the coffee maker by the door, Earl's glasses on the counter beside the crossword. The place was old and worn and plain, but it was working. Working was the word. Jesse walked in from the bay, nodded at Connie, and went back. "That's Jesse," Ruth said. "He runs the repair bay." Connie sat on the stool behind the counter. "It's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Something I could point to and say, 'Mom, this isn't working.'" Ruth poured two mugs and set one in front of her. "And now?" she asked. Connie wrapped both hands around the mug. Through the window, Hank's truck pulled in with a load of firewood. He waved without stopping, stacked the wood, and left. "Who was that?" "Hank. Your grandfather's closest friend. He just shows up with firewood." Connie stared into her coffee. "Dad says you're holding on to this place out of spite. What do you think?" Connie looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. "I think you're different. I don't know what happened here, but you're not the same person who walked out of that courtroom." Ruth let the words sit between them. She didn't push. She had learned that from Earl. You let people arrive at the truth on their own. When they get there, you pour them another cup. "I sided with him during the divorce," Connie said. "It was easier. He had the answers. He always had answers." She paused. "You just agreed with everything. I didn't respect that." "You were right not to," Ruth said. Connie looked surprised. as though she had expected defense instead of acknowledgement. I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier, Ruth said. That's not something to respect. But I'm done. She poured her daughter more coffee and let the afternoon light do what it wanted with the room. They sat together behind the counter while the hours passed, not filling the silence with explanation, just letting it be what it was. For the first time in longer than Ruth could measure, the quiet between them wasn't distance. It was rest. Connie left the next morning. She hugged Ruth at the car, held on longer than she usually did, and said, "Call me after the hearing." Ruth let the words sit between them. She didn't push. She had learned that from Earl. You let people arrive at the truth on their own. When they get there, you pour them another cup. I sided with him during the divorce, Connie said. It was easier. He had the answers. He always had answers. She paused. You just agreed with everything. I didn't respect that. You were right not to, Ruth said. Connie looked surprised, as though she had expected defense instead of acknowledgement. I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier, Ruth said. That's not something to respect. But I'm done. She poured her daughter more coffee and let the afternoon light do what it wanted with the room. They sat together behind the counter while the hours passed, not filling the silence with explanation, just letting it be what it was. For the first time in longer than Ruth could measure, the quiet between them wasn't distance. It was rest. Connie left the next morning. She hugged Ruth at the car, held on longer than she usually did, and said, "Call me after the hearing." Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on the courthouse steps. Ruth was walking to her truck when she heard footsteps behind her. Dennis was standing on the bottom step, his jacket over one arm. He looked different from how he'd looked at the station. The confidence was still there, but something behind it had shifted. He seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "When did you become this person?" he asked. Ruth looked at him. The man she'd married at 25. The man who had built a career on knowing the value of things and missed the value of everything that mattered. "I always was," she said. "You just never looked." She walked to the truck and drove home. The word came without effort. She let it stay. Home. The sun was low when she pulled into the lot. Jesse was closing the bay doors. Hank had gone for the day, but fresh firewood was stacked against the wall. The coffee pot inside was still warm. Ruth walked behind the counter to the breaker panel. Earl had wired the building himself, and the panel was labeled in his handwriting. She found the switch-marked sign and flipped it. Through the front window, she could see the glow. Earl's hand-painted letters, illuminated for the first time since he died. Faded. Soft. Visible against the darkening sky. Macklin Gas and Service. Jesse came around the corner of the building and looked up at it. "Looks good," he said. Ruth stood in the doorway. It wasn't bright. It wasn't new. But it was on. She stood there for a while, watching the sign hold its light against the coming dark before going inside. 3 months later, the dogwoods along Route 11 were blooming. White blossoms pressed against the green canopy, the air smelling like warm earth and new growth. Spring had come to the valley the way it always did, slowly, and then all at once. The station was alive. The pumps ran every day. Jesse handled most of the repair work. The coffee pot stayed on from 6 in the morning until whoever left last turned it off, which was usually Hank, who had developed a habit of sitting on the porch until well after dark. Jesse had changed. Not in any way you could point to. He still arrived early and stayed late and worked with the same quiet focus. But there was a steadiness to him that hadn't been there in the beginning. He had enrolled in an online mechanic certification program, studying on a used laptop Ruth bought with station earnings. He sat at the counter after hours, reading about diesel diagnostics and fuel injection systems, taking notes in a composition book with careful, deliberate handwriting. Ruth noticed the handwriting one evening and didn't say anything. Some observations were better held quietly. The porch had become a gathering place. Regulars came in the late afternoon with lawn chairs they left folded against the building between visits. An older man brought a checkerboard and left it on the railing. By the end of the first week, there was a running tournament that nobody kept official score of, but everyone took seriously. Ruth learned the names, the families, the troubles. She learned who was behind on bills and who had just gotten a grandchild and who needed a brake job but couldn't swing the cost. She kept this information the way Earl had, in her head and in her actions, quietly, without announcement. Ruth watched Jesse one morning through the bay door. He was walking a nervous teenage girl through her first oil change, patient, explaining each step, letting her hold the wrench, and feel the bolt loosen. "You're good at this," Ruth said afterward. "At what?" "Teaching." Jesse looked uncomfortable. "I'm just showing her what goes where. That's what teaching is." He didn't have an answer for that. He went back to work, but she could see that the words had landed somewhere. The valley absorbed her generosity the way it had absorbed Earl's, not as charity, but as part of how things worked. A man whose brakes needed fixing found his bill listed only the cost of the pads. A woman whose husband had recently left found an envelope of grocery money in her glove compartment. Ruth didn't announce what she was doing. Nobody asked. She wasn't trying to be Earl. She was trying to be useful, and she was learning, slowly, that usefulness and love are sometimes the same thing, expressed in the language of work. Connie came back in May, and this time she brought her children, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6, both wide-eyed, wearing city clothes that seemed to belong to a different planet. Ruth showed them the counter, the reading glasses, the crossword. She let the girl ring up an imaginary sale on the old mechanical register. She took them to the bay and showed them Earl's tools, lifted the boy so he could see the pegboard, the outlined shapes of every wrench and socket. She let the girl hold a flashlight while she explained how to check tire pressure. "Press it here," she told the boy, "and this number tells you if there's enough air." He pressed the gauge to the valve stem. 32. "Perfect. You just did your first tire check." He grinned, and it was the same grin Ruth had worn at his age, in the same bay, learning the same things from Earl. She felt it in her chest, time folding over on itself. A week later, Hank arrived with something wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the counter and slid it toward her. Inside, a framed photograph, slightly faded behind dusty glass. Earl and a young Ruth in front of the station. Ruth was maybe 6, wearing overalls and a wide grin. Earl stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder, squinting into the sun. The sign was freshly painted. The pumps were shining. "He gave me a copy after he took it," Hank said. "Told me it was the best picture he ever took. Said it was the only time both of you looked exactly like who you were supposed to be." Ruth hung it on the wall behind the counter, beside the reading glasses and the crossword. 3 objects from a man gone more than a decade, and now a photograph that proved he had known who she was before she knew it herself. Late one afternoon, with the sun dropping behind the western ridge, a road-dusty minivan pulled into the lot with a cracked taillight and an engine that sounded like it was working harder than it should. A young woman climbed out, maybe 30, wearing a faded jacket. 3 children were visible in the back seat. The youngest was asleep in a car seat. The woman had the expression Ruth had seen on other faces and, once, in her own mirror, someone carrying more than she could say. "Could I get some gas?" Of course. Ruth filled the tank, checked the oil, and noticed the front left tire was low. She added air without asking. When the pump clicked off, the woman opened her purse and began digging through it. Fingers moving past receipts and loose change, the quick motion of someone counting what they have and hoping it's enough. "Pay it next time you're through," Ruth said. The woman looked up. "What? Next time you drive through? You can pay then. I can't just take." "Sure you can. I'll be here." The woman stared at her. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together hard. "Why?" she asked. Ruth smiled. "My father used to say the same thing." The minivan disappeared around the curve. Ruth watched until the taillights were gone, then went inside. She closed up the station at dusk. Jesse upstairs, Hank's firewood stacked against the wall, the checkerboard set up for tomorrow's game. She turned off the lights one by one. The front room, the stockroom, the counter lamp. She picked up Earl's reading glasses and cleaned them with the hem of her shirt the way she'd done 1,000 times as a girl, then set them back beside the crossword. 27 across, still filled in. 28 across, still blank. She left them that way. She locked the front door with the key her father had turned 10,000 times before her. Through the glass, she could see the sign glowing against the darkening sky, faded, hand-painted, and lit. She climbed the stairs to the apartment that smelled like coffee and motor oil and home. She was 58 years old. She was just getting started.